The crisp German air bit at Private Elvis Presley's face as he stepped off the troop train. It wasn't the kind of cold that tickled. It was the kind that sank its teeth in right down to the bone. Friedberg, Germany, September 1958. This was a long way from Memphis, Tennessee, a universe away from the screaming crowds and the blinding stage lights. Here, he was just another soldier, a fact that both rattled him and surprisingly offered a strange kind of peace. He pulled his olive green jacket tighter, his shoulders, usually broad and confident, slumping slightly under the weight of his duffel bag and the unspoken weight of his new reality. The barracks loomed a drab utilitarian block of concrete that promised little in the way of warmth or comfort. Inside, it was a cacophony of unfamiliar accents and the metallic clang of lockers. The air smelled of stale cigarettes, old sweat, and a hint of disinfectant, a stark contrast to the sweet scent of honeysuckle and fried chicken he was used to. "Presley, this way?" A sergeant barked, his voice grating like gravel. "Find a bunk, chow, in 20. Elvis nodded, muttering a quiet, "Yes, sir." He found an empty cot, neatly made, and dropped his bag with a thud that echoed in the surprisingly quiet space. He sat down, the thin mattress offering little cushioning, and stared at the steel locker. It was all so structured, so impersonal. The king of rock and roll, reduced to a uniform. Part of him welcomed the anonymity, the chance to just be for a while away from the constant demands of fame. Another part, a deeper, hungrier part, longed for something familiar, something real. 20 minutes later, he was in the mess hall, standing in line with dozens of other soldiers, each holding a metal tray. The smell wasn't promising. It was a smell he'd come to recognize quickly. Military food, bland, practical, designed to sustain, not to delight. He got his helping of what looked like stew, a scoop of mashed potatoes that seemed suspiciously gray, and a piece of bread that felt like cardboard. He sat down at a long table surrounded by strangers and pushed the food around with his fork. It tasted exactly as it smelled. Nothing. Days blurred into weeks. Drills, marches, guard duty. The routine was relentless. Canned peaches became a luxury, a brief escape from the endless rotation of mystery meat and boiled vegetables. He missed his mama's cooking, the rich gravy, the crisp fried chicken, the sweet potato pie. He missed the simple joy of a home-cooked meal made with love, not efficiency. One afternoon, while on a patrol route near the edge of town, the biting wind cutting through his uniform, Elvis caught sight of something that stirred him. It was a small ramshackle house, its paint peeling, its windows streaked with grime, not unlike some of the houses he'd grown up seeing in Tupelo before Memphis. A wisp of smoke curled from its chimney, a sign of life in the otherwise gray landscape. As he drew closer, he saw them. A young girl, maybe 8 or 9, with braids the color of straw, was struggling to carry a small bucket of coal. Her coat was patched, her shoes worn. Beside her, a woman, older perhaps, in her late 30s or early 40s, with lines of worry etched around her eyes, was trying to fix a loose shutter. An even older woman, her back stooped, was sweeping dust from the stoop with a worn broom. They were German, obviously. The war had ended over a decade ago, but its scars were still visible everywhere, especially in the faces of people like these. They looked tired, resilient, and most of all, hungry. Their movements were careful, economical, as if every ounce of energy was precious. Elvis watched them for a long moment, hidden partially by a bare tree. He saw the girl stumble, and her mother quickly steady her, a look of quiet concern passing between them. Then the old woman straightened, her gaze sweeping the street, and her eyes, surprisingly sharp despite their age, seemed to land right on him. He quickly looked away, feeling a flush creep up his neck. He was a soldier. On duty, he shouldn't be gawking. But he couldn't shake the image of their faces, especially the little girls. So thin, so serious. He returned to the barracks, the bland mess hall, food waiting for him again. He picked at it, his mind replaying the scene. He had so much food here, more than enough. Army rations were endless, if uninspiring, canned goods, dry biscuits, processed meats, all of it designed to keep soldiers fueled, no matter what. And that family looked like they barely had enough to get by. A thought, small and persistent, began to form in his mind. It was a crazy thought, probably against regulations, definitely outside his normal routine. But it felt right. Deep down in his gut, what if he could trade? Not money, not anything official, just a simple exchange. Rations for something real, something homemade, something with a little bit of soul in it. He imagined the smell of a real kitchen, not the sterile clang of the mess hall. He imagined the taste of fresh bread, not the dense prepackaged kind. He imagined a meal prepared with care, not mass-produced sustenance. It was a crazy idea. Yes, but then again, a kid from Tupelo had become Elvis Presley. He picked up a can of peaches from his locker, weighing it in his hand. It was sweet. An indulgence maybe. Just maybe it could be a bridge, he decided. Then and there, he would try. He would find a way. The cold German air suddenly didn't feel quite so biting anymore. He had a mission, one that had nothing to do with army drills and everything to do with a simple human need. The next afternoon, Elvis found himself walking his patrol route with Private Johnson, a lanky soldier from Nebraska who seemed to think Elvis's real name was Hollywood. Johnson, blissfully unaware of the true identity of his bunkmate, beyond the rumors that he was some kind of singer, chattered about his girlfriend back home and the terrible quality of army coffee. Elvis, meanwhile, kept one eye on the small, unassuming house with the peeling paint. He had a few items tucked into his rucksack, carefully selected from his own rations. A can of peaches, a chocolate bar, and a sealed pack of instant coffee. These were precious commodities, especially the coffee. He felt a nervous flutter in his stomach, a feeling far more intense than any stage fright he'd ever known. What if they thought he was crazy? What if they were offended? Fraternizing with locals was generally frowned upon, especially for a soldier with such a visible profile, even if he was trying to keep it low-key. As they rounded a corner, he saw the young girl again. Liesl, as he decided to call her in his head. She was sweeping fallen leaves from the small front yard, her small, worn broom looking almost as tall as she was. Her braids swung as she worked, and her brow was furrowed in concentration. "Hey, Johnson," Elvis said, trying to sound casual. "Mind if I just check something out over here? Be right back." Johnson shrugged. "Go for it, Presley. Just don't get into trouble." Elvis nodded, his heart thumping. He walked slowly towards the house, trying to appear nonchalant. Liesl looked up, her broom pausing mid-sweep. Her eyes, a startling blue, widened slightly as she saw his uniform, then his face. She clutched the broom handle tighter, a flicker of fear crossing her delicate features. "Guten Tag," Elvis said, remembering the only German phrase he really knew. "Hello?" He offered a small, reassuring smile, trying to convey friendliness. Liesl didn't reply, but she didn't run either. She just stared, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension in her gaze. Suddenly, the front door opened, and the woman from yesterday, Greta, stepped out. She was holding a basket of laundry. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, narrowed slightly as she saw Elvis. Her stance became defensive, her body language subtly shielding Liesl. "Can I help you, soldier?" she asked, in heavily accented but clear English. Her voice was firm, not unkind, but wary. Elvis felt a flush creep up his neck. He wasn't used to this kind of scrutiny outside of a performance. "Ma'am," he began, trying to keep his voice soft, non-threatening. I saw your daughter and, well, I just wanted to, I have some extra, provisions from the army." He gestured vaguely to his pack. "And I thought maybe you could use them." Carefully pulled out the can of peaches and the chocolate bar, holding them out. They weren't much, but they were a start. Greta's eyes flickered from the food to his face, then back to the food. Suspicion warred with something else. A flicker of hunger, perhaps, or surprise. "Why?" she asked, her voice still cautious. Elvis shrugged, trying to be honest without sounding pitying. "Well, ma'am, we get a lot of this stuff, more than we can eat. Really? And it's not exactly home cooking, you know, and I saw your family. You look like you could use some good food." He smiled that famous winning smile that usually charmed millions. Here it seemed to just create more confusion. Liesl, meanwhile, had taken a step closer, her gaze fixed on the chocolate bar. Her stomach rumbled audibly, and she quickly pressed a hand to it. Embarrassed, Greta saw the hungry look in her daughter's eyes. Her shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. "We don't take charity, soldier," she said, but her voice was softer now. "It's not charity, ma'am," Elvis quickly countered. "Think of it as a trade. See, I miss proper food. Real food and, well, army food. It ain't much to talk about. If you ever made an extra loaf of bread or a little soup, I'd be mighty grateful to trade for it. No pressure, of course, just an idea." He extended the peaches and chocolate bar again, a genuine smile on his face. He watched as Greta looked at the chocolate, then at Liesl's pleading eyes. Finally, slowly she reached out and took the items. Her fingers brushed his. And he felt a jolt, not of electricity, but of connection. "Thank you, soldier," she said, her voice quiet. This is very kind." Liesl, meanwhile, had already snatched the chocolate bar and was examining it with wide-eyed wonder. "My name's Elvis, ma'am," he offered. "Private Presley?" He paused, then took a chance. "And you are Greta Schmidt," she replied, a faint smile gracing her lips. "And this is my daughter, Liesl." Liesl looked up at him, a tiny smile of her own forming as she clutched the chocolate. "Danke," she whispered. "Thank you." Elvis's heart warmed. "You're very welcome, Liesl." He stayed for another moment, feeling the awkwardness begin to dissipate, replaced by a tentative thread of understanding. "Well, I gotta go," he said, gesturing back to Johnson, who was now impatiently tapping his foot. "Duty calls?" He nodded to Greta. Maybe I'll see you around." He tried to make it sound casual, but he hoped she understood the unspoken offer. Greta nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Perhaps," she said as Elvis walked away. He risked a glance back. Greta was still standing on the stoop, watching him. Liesl was already unwrapping the chocolate bar, her eyes bright. He felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, a feeling more fulfilling than any roaring applause. He hadn't just given them food. He'd opened a door. And in return, he'd felt a whisper of hope for something more than just army rations. He hoped she would take him up on his unspoken offer. He really truly hoped. Days passed. Elvis continued his army routine, the drills, and the regulations weighing on him. But now there was a new undercurrent, a quiet anticipation. Every time his patrol route took him near the Schmidt's house, he cast a hopeful glance, but there was no sign. He wondered if he'd misread the situation, if Greta had taken his offer as an insult or simply forgotten about it. Canned peaches and chocolate bar were a one-time thing, nothing more. His appetite for the bland mess hall food, which had briefly been forgotten, returned with a vengeance. Then, one chilly afternoon, just as Elvis was finishing up his guard duty near the edge of the town, a small figure approached. It was Liesl, her small hands tucked into the pockets of her worn coat, her breath puffing out in white clouds. She looked nervous, but determined. "Liesl," he said, his voice softer than usual, "is everything all right?" She nodded shyly, then held out something wrapped in a clean white cloth. It was a small loaf of bread, still warm, with a golden brown crust. The aroma, faint but distinct, reached him. Yeasty, comforting, real. His stomach rumbled in response. "Mama, she made this," Liesl said in her quiet voice, her German accent thick. "For you," she said. "Thank you for the peaches and the chocolate." Elvis felt a surge of warmth that had nothing to do with the thin sun trying to break through the clouds. "Well, Liesl, that's mighty kind of your mama," he said, taking the bread carefully. It felt substantial, alive. "Please tell her I appreciate it, a lot." Liesl nodded, a small smile finally appearing on her face. She said you could come. she added, her eyes darting towards her house. "For supper tonight, if you wish." Elvis's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the invitation. "Supper?" he repeated. "Invitation. Liesl, tell your mama I'd be honored," Elvis said, a genuine grin spreading across his face. "Tell her I'll be there. And I'll bring some more provisions." He watched as Liesl turned and practically skipped back towards her home, her small frame radiating a newfound lightness. Clutched the bread, feeling its warmth seeping into his gloved hand. It was more than just bread. It was a promise. That evening, Elvis made sure he was off duty. He changed into a clean uniform, trying to look presentable. He loaded his rucksack with a small haul of army rations, a large can of beef stew, a few tins of tuna, a bag of sugar, and a few packets of instant coffee. He knew these items were valuable in post-war Germany, and he wanted to show his appreciation. The walk to the Schmidt house felt different this time, less nervous, more excited. The smell of cooking, faint but unmistakable, drifted on the evening air as he approached. It was a smell he hadn't experienced in months, maybe even years. Not since he'd left home. For the road, he knocked hesitantly on the door. It opened almost immediately, revealing Greta. She smiled, a warm, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Welcome, Elvis," she said, stepping aside. "Please, come in." He stepped into a small, but incredibly clean and surprisingly cozy living area. A fire crackled in a small stove, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of vegetables and something savory simmering. Liesl was perched on a stool by the table, drawing in a worn notebook, and then he saw the older woman he'd noticed before, sitting in a worn armchair, knitting. "This is my mother, Anneliese." Greta introduced. Anneliese looked up, her wise, kind eyes assessing him. "Gut Abend, soldier," Anneliese said, her voice raspy but gentle. "Welcome to our humble home." "Good evening, ma'am," Elvis replied, feeling a wave of respect. "It's an honor to be here." He placed his rucksack on the floor. "I brought a few things if you can use them." Greta opened the rucksack, her eyes widening slightly at the contents. "Oh, Elvis, this is too much," she said, though a look of relief washed over her face. "Thank you, these are very good. We can use all of it." "It's nothing," he insisted. "Just glad to help, and I'm mighty hungry for something real." They sat at a small wooden table, well worn but polished. Greta placed bowls of soup before them. It was a simple vegetable soup, perhaps, with a bit of meat, but it was hot, fragrant, and utterly delicious. The bread Liesl had given him earlier was on the table, sliced and ready. As he took his first spoonful, Elvis closed his eyes for a moment. The warmth spread through him, not just physically, but deep inside. It tasted like goodness, like care, like home. It was more flavorful than any fancy meal he'd had in a five-star restaurant. "This is wonderful, Greta," he said, truly meaning it. "Simple," she replied, "but it's made with what we have." Liesl watched him, her bright blue eyes full of curiosity. Anneliese observed them all with a quiet dignity. The conversation was sparse at first, a mix of halting English and Elvis's few German words. But as the meal progressed and the warmth of the fire filled the room, a sense of ease began to settle. Elvis found himself talking about Memphis, about his family, about the simple things he missed. He carefully avoided discussing his fame, wanting to connect on a human level. He learned about their struggles, their resilience in rebuilding after the war, their hope for a brighter future. Liesl giggled when he tried to pronounce a German word and failed miserably. Anneliese nodded sagely at his stories, offering quiet words of wisdom. As the evening deepened and he prepared to leave, Elvis felt a profound sense of gratitude. This simple meal, this shared warmth, was more nourishing than anything the army could provide. "Thank you, Greta." "Anneliese." "Liesl," he said, standing at the door. "That was the best meal I've had in months, maybe years." Greta smiled. "You are welcome, Elvis. Please come again whenever you wish." Annalise nodded. "Our door is always open." Elvis walked back to the barracks under a sky full of stars, the cold air no longer bothering him. He felt full, truly full for the first time in a long time, not just his stomach, but his spirit. He had found a little piece of home in Friedberg, in the humble kitchen of the Schmidt family, and he knew with certainty that he would be back. The visits quickly became a cherished ritual. For Elvis, the end of the day stopped, being just about lights out and the monotonous hum of the barracks. It became a time to anticipate a beacon in the otherwise unchanging landscape of Army life. Every few days, or whenever his duties allowed, he would make his way to the Schmidt household, his rucksack filled with a carefully chosen assortment of Army rations. He learned quickly what they valued most: canned meats, sugar, flour, coffee, and anything that could stretch their own meager supplies. In return, he was welcomed into a world of simple, hearty German cooking that made his taste buds sing. Greta was a master of making much from little. He devoured her Kartoffelsalat, a warm, tangy potato salad made with bacon and onions, so different from the creamy American version. He savored the rich, slow-cooked flavors of sauerbraten, though he knew the meat was a rare treat for them, probably from some special trade they'd made themselves. He relished the crisp crackle of schnitzel, even if it was sometimes made with less expensive cuts of meat, and the bread, always fresh, crusty on the outside, soft and yielding on the inside, tasting of yeast and warmth. Annalise, with her ancient wisdom and nimble fingers, would sometimes bake a sweet treat, an Apfelstrudel so flaky and apple-sweet it brought tears to his eyes, or delicate Plätzchen, small buttery cookies that melted in his mouth. Each meal was an experience, a journey into a different culture through its food, but it was more than just the food. It was the company. Liesl, and as she shy, had blossomed. She would excitedly greet him at the door, her bright blue eyes sparkling. She'd bring him her drawings, usually of soldiers or flowers, and ask him about America. Elvis would patiently answer her questions, sometimes teaching her simple English words, while she in turn taught him German phrases. "Danke, bitte, ich gebe dich," he learned to say. The last one making Greta blush and Annalise chuckle. Greta, too, became more open. She shared stories of her husband, lost during the war, and the struggles of raising a child in a country still piecing itself back together. She spoke of the little joys, the spring flowers, Liesl's laughter, the quiet strength of her mother. Elvis, in turn, found himself telling her about his humble beginnings in Tupelo, the sacrifices his parents made, the bewildering ascent to fame. He spoke about his love for gospel music, his dreams, his fears. It was a strange kind of therapy, sharing his true self with people who saw him not as a global sensation, but simply as Elvis, the kind American soldier who liked good food. Annalise, the grandmother, was the quiet anchor of the family. She rarely spoke much, but her presence was comforting. She had seen much in her life, and her eyes held a depth of understanding. Sometimes she would watch Elvis with a knowing gaze, a faint smile playing on her lips, as if she could see right through his celebrity facade to the gentle soul beneath. She would offer him a cup of fragrant herbal tea after dinner, a simple gesture of care that meant the world to him. Back at the barracks, his fellow soldiers started to notice. "Presley, what's got you looking so spry all the time?" Private Johnson asked one morning, sniffing suspiciously at Elvis's lunch. "And what is that delicious smell? Smells like real food." Elvis just grinned. "Just got myself a better mess. Tit Johnson keeps the flavor in." But he couldn't hide it forever. The faint scent of spices, garlic, or cooked meat would sometimes cling to his uniform. He'd occasionally bring back a leftover piece of bread or a homemade cookie, carefully wrapped, and share it with Johnson, who would devour it with wide eyes. "Man, Presley, crumbs on his chin. This is 1,000 times better than the slop they serve us." Elvis would just wink, Got a special connection, that's all. He didn't want to jeopardize the arrangement by drawing too much attention. Fraternization rules were loose, but they existed. He knew he was walking a fine line, but the benefits far outweighed the risks. Not only was his stomach happy, but his spirit was too. The Schmidt family had become his sanctuary, his home away from home. They were a reminder that even in a foreign land, amidst the rigid structure of army life, humanity and connection could still thrive, warm and inviting, like the glowing embers in the Schmidt's humble stove. He wasn't just trading rations for food. He was trading loneliness for belonging. And that, he realized, was the most nourishing trait of all. The aroma of freshly baked bread was a comforting blanket, wrapping around Elvis the moment Greta opened the door. It wasn't just the food now, it was the entire atmosphere of the Schmidt home. The soft glow of the lamp, the rhythmic click of Annaliese's knitting needles, Liesl's hushed chatter as she described her day. These were the moments Elvis craved, the moments that felt more real than any concert hall filled with screaming fans. One evening, after finishing a hearty goulash, Elvis found himself lingering longer than usual. He was helping Liesl with the drawing, teaching her how to shade with a pencil, when his gaze fell upon a dusty old guitar propped in a corner. It looked well loved, perhaps even a family heirloom. "Is that yours, Annalise?" he asked, pointing to it. Grandmother looked up from her knitting, a rare smile gracing her lips. "Ah, no, Elvis, that was my husband's. He played for me long ago." Her eyes held a distant, wistful look. "It has not been played in many years. It is probably out of tune." "Mind if I try it?" he asked gently. I play a little." Greta and Liesl looked surprised and excited. "You play, Liesl?" exclaimed, jumping off her stool. "Can you play for us?" Elvis hesitated for a moment. He hadn't played informally for anyone in years, not without the roar of a crowd, but this was different. This was family. He picked up the guitar. It was heavy, its wood worn smooth with age, but it felt good in his hands. He plucked a string. It was indeed out of tune, but he deftly adjusted the pegs, his fingers moving with practiced ease. He started with a simple, familiar gospel tune, a song his mama used to sing. His voice, usually powerful and electrifying, was soft and melodic, filling the small room with a gentle harmony. Greta and Annalise listened intently, their eyes closed, lost in the music. Liesl sat cross-legged on the floor, her chin resting on her hands, utterly captivated. After the gospel song, he played a few blues chords, then a simple, wistful melody he'd made up himself, a reflection of the quiet melancholia that sometimes settled over him in Germany. He wasn't performing, he was simply sharing a part of himself. The music flowed effortlessly from him, a conversation without words. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then Liesl broke the spell. "That was beautiful, Elvis," she whispered, her eyes wide with awe. "Can you teach me?" Elvis chuckled. "Maybe a few chords, little one day." Greta, her eyes glistening, said, "You have a true gift, Elvis. Your voice, it is so kind." She didn't know he was famous, but she recognized the talent, the soul in his music. "Thank you, Greta," he said, genuinely touched. He felt seen, truly seen for the first time in a long while. They talked late into the evening. Elvis spoke about the music scene in America, the energy of rock and roll, the dreams of young people. He described the vast landscapes of his home country, the bustling cities, the quiet farmlands. He found himself sharing anecdotes from his childhood, funny stories about growing up poor but happy. In turn, Greta and Annalise painted a vivid picture of German life, the traditions, the festivals, the resilience of their people. They told him about the challenges of the post-war years, the rationing, the rebuilding, the quiet determination to move forward. They spoke of the simple pleasures they found in their garden, in the community, in their shared history. "We have little," Annalise said softly one night, her hand resting on Greta's, "but we have each other, and now we have you." Elvis. her words wrapped around his heart. He wasn't just an army private to them or a source of American rations. He was part of their circle, a friend, almost family. He felt a profound sense of belonging, a connection that transcended language barriers and cultural differences. These were the moments that nourished him more than any meal. The shared laughter, the quiet understanding, the simple act of listening and being listened to. He saw their resilience, their courage, their quiet dignity, and it humbled him. He, Elvis Presley, with all his fame and fortune, found true richness in a small, humble German home, exchanging stories and songs for food, and in return, receiving something far more precious, genuine human connection. He knew deep in his heart that these memories would be carried with him long after his military service was over. The warmth and comfort of the Schmidt home had begun to blur the edges of army life for Elvis. He felt grounded there, safe, but the outside world, the structured, rule-bound, military world, was always lurking. He knew his frequent visits and the reciprocal exchange of food could be seen as a violation of fraternization rules, or at the very least, an improper use of army supplies. He had been careful, but his increasing cheerfulness and the occasional, delicious scent clinging to him were starting to attract attention. One afternoon, as Elvis was leaving the Schmidt's house, a small package of warm Apfelstrudel, carefully wrapped in his rucksack, he found himself face to face with Captain Davies. Davies was a stern-by-the-book officer known for his unyielding adherence to regulations. "Taking a stroll, are we, sir?" "Yes, sir. Just getting some fresh air." Elvis's mind raced. He could feel the warmth of the strudel through his pack. He hoped Davies couldn't smell it. "I see," Davies said, his eyes flicking towards the Schmidt house. "You seem to spend a fair bit of your fresh air time around this particular residence, Private." Elvis swallowed. "Sir, I've been helping them out. They're a family in need." "Helping them out?" Davies raised an eyebrow. "With what exactly? Army rations, perhaps? Fraternizing with locals? And diverting army supplies for personal use or exchange is a serious offense." Elvis felt a cold dread wash over him. This was it. He had known this moment might come. He had to choose his words carefully. "Sir, with all due respect," Elvis began, choosing his words carefully, "I haven't diverted anything. My rations are mine, and I've simply been sharing. They've been through a lot here, Captain. The war hit them hard." He paused, taking a breath. "And in return, sir, they've shown me a kindness I haven't found anywhere else here. They're good people, sir. A grand girl. They just need a little help." Davies stared at him, his face unmoving. "Kindness, Private, does not excuse breaking regulations. We have a system in place for aid. You're a soldier, not a charitable organization." "Yes, sir, I understand that, sir," Elvis pressed on, his voice earnest. "But sometimes, sir, a little human kindness goes further than any official program. They don't have much. And I've got plenty." "It just felt right, sir." Davies walked around him, inspecting him from all angles as if looking for a hidden infraction. He paused, his gaze fixed on Elvis's rucksack. Elvis braced himself. "And what exactly is in that pack, Private?" Davies asked, his voice low. "Just personal items, sir," Elvis replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Davies reached out, and for a terrifying second, Elvis thought he was going to demand to inspect the pack. Instead, Davies simply tapped the outside of the rucksack. "Smells like cinnamon," he muttered, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He then stepped back, his expression returning to its stern default. "Private Presley, let me be clear. Your conduct is on my radar. Any further reports of unauthorized fraternization or diversion of supplies, and you will face disciplinary action. Understood?" "Understood, Aver," Elvis said, relief washing over him. It was a warning, a stern one, but not an immediate end to his visits. "Good," Davies said, then turned sharply and walked away, leaving Elvis standing alone on the street, his heart still thumping. Elvis quickly made his way back to the barracks. The strudel now feeling like a forbidden treasure, he felt a mix of fear and gratitude. Davies had seen something, perhaps a genuine intention rather than malicious intent. Or maybe he just didn't want the hassle of disciplining a soldier who, even in anonymity, still drew attention. Later that evening, Elvis sat on his bunk thinking about the encounter. He couldn't risk the Schmidt family being implicated, or his own military career being jeopardized. But he couldn't stop visiting them either. They had become too important. He resolved to be even more discreet. No more obvious visits during daylight patrols. He would arrange to visit only during his off hours, making sure no one followed him. He would be more careful about the amount of rations he carried, dispersing them over multiple visits if necessary. He would become more like a shadow, slipping in and out, but never abandoning the warmth and comfort he found within those walls. Close call had shaken him, but it had also solidified his resolve. The connection he had forged with the Schmidt family was too precious to let go. He would simply have to be smarter, more cautious. For the taste of homemade food and the even sweeter taste of genuine human connection, he was willing to take the risk. The crisp German autumn had given way to a biting winter. Snow dusted the rooftops of Friedberg, turning the drab landscape into a sparkling, silent wonderland. Christmas was approaching, and in the barracks there was a palpable longing for home, for family, for the familiar comforts of the holiday season. Elvis felt it too. A deep ache for his mother's presence, for the festive sounds and smells of Graceland. But then there was the Schmidt family. They had become his own surrogate family, a quiet haven against the biting cold and the loneliness. A few days before Christmas, as Elvis arrived for his usual evening visit, he noticed something different. The air inside the small house was filled with an unusually fragrant and complex aroma. Unlike anything Greta had cooked before, Liesl, her face flushed with excitement, pulled him towards the table. "Look, Elvis. Mama made something special," she exclaimed, her eyes wide. On the table there was a platter, and on it sat a golden brown, perfectly fried chicken. Next to it was a bowl of creamy mashed potatoes and another of what looked like collard greens, and on the side a small, carefully crafted piece of sweet potato pie. Elvis stared, his jaw slightly agape. "Greta, Annalise, what is all this?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Greta smiled, a rare, almost shy smile. "We heard you speak of your mama's cooking, Elvis, and especially of this fried chicken. We tried our best. It is our Christmas gift to you, a taste of home from us." Annalise nodded, her wise eyes twinkling. "We asked other American soldiers how to make it," she confessed softly. "They gave us their recipes. It took much effort to find the chicken, but we managed." Elvis felt a lump form in his throat. This wasn't just a meal. It was a profound gesture of love and understanding. They had listened to him, truly listened to his longing for a piece of his own world, and gone to incredible lengths to provide it. The aroma alone was enough to transport him back to the kitchen in Memphis. He sat down almost reverently and took a bite of the chicken. It was perfect, crispy, flavorful, juicy. It wasn't exactly his mama's. No one's could be, but it was incredibly close. And the mashed potatoes, the greens, the sweet potato pie, each bite was a communion, a bridge between two worlds, two cultures. This is incredible," Elvis managed to say, his voice thick. "Thank you. All of you. It means more than you can imagine." Liesl beamed, proud of their achievement. Greta watched him, a quiet satisfaction in her eyes. Annalise simply smiled. After the meal, feeling full and incredibly content, Elvis had a gift for them too. He had managed to acquire a small, portable radio, one that could pick up American Forces Network AFN broadcasts. He knew they didn't have much in the way of entertainment, and he wanted them to experience a little bit of his world. "I have something for you," he said, pulling the radio from his rucksack. "It's not much, but it might bring a little joy." He plugged it in and carefully tuned it to an AFN station. A lively rock and roll song blared out, filling the quiet room with a sound they had never heard before. "These," gasped her eyes wide with wonder, Greta looked surprised. Then a small smile played on her lips as she tapped her foot to the rhythm. Even Annalise seemed intrigued, her head cocked to one side as she listened. Elvis grinned, seeing their reactions. "That's rock and roll," he explained. "It's what I sing." He decided to reveal a little more about his civilian life, feeling that they had earned his trust back home. "I'm a singer, a professional one." Greta asked, a note of wonder in her voice. He shrugged modestly. "Some folks say so, but here, I'm just Elvis." Liesl, meanwhile, was already trying to mimic the dancers she'd seen in magazines, swaying awkwardly to the music. The room was filled with laughter and the vibrant sounds of a world far away. That night, as Elvis walked back to the barracks through the falling snow, he felt a profound sense of peace. He had shared his world with them, and they had in turn given him a piece of his own, a tangible taste of home. In the midst of war-torn Germany, in a humble little house, he had found something more precious than fame or fortune: true friendship, unconditional warmth, and the comforting embrace of family, who saw past the legend to the man beneath. It was a Christmas he would never forget. The days grew shorter, the nights colder, and the burden of hardship weighed heavily on the Schmidt family. One evening, Elvis arrived to find the usual warmth of the home replaced by a quiet anxiety. Annalise, usually bustling or knitting, was lying on a makeshift bed near the stove, pale and weak, her breathing shallow. "She caught a bad cold," Greta explained, her voice hushed with worry. "The doctor came, but he said she needs rest and good food." Elvis's heart went out to them. He knelt beside Annalise, gently taking her frail hand. "Annalise," he said softly, "you rest now. You'll be well." He knew he couldn't just give them money, not directly. That would raise too many questions and potentially violate army rules, but he couldn't stand by and do nothing. Annalise had become like a third grandmother to him. "Greta," he said, rising, "I'm going back to the barracks. I'll be back as soon as I can. I'll see what I can do." He left his mind racing. Thought about the army supplies, about the abundance of everything they had in contrast to the scarcity. Here he couldn't steal, but he could be resourceful. Back at the barracks, he sought out Sergeant Miller, a gruff but fair quartermaster. Sergeant Elvis began, choosing his words carefully. "My boots are leaking. I need a new pair, and I'm freezing at night. Any chance of getting an extra blanket or two? And maybe some of those emergency heat packets?" Miller eyed him. "Presley, you just got new boots last month, and you got 3 blankets on your bunk already." "Sir, this German cold is different," Elvis insisted, putting on his most convincing, slightly exaggerated southern drawl. "Just cuts right through you, and these boots, they just ain't holding up. I'm telling you, I'll be laid up with pneumonia if I don't get some better gear." He even managed a convincing shiver. Miller sighed, probably deciding it was easier to just give him what he asked for than listen to a protracted complaint from that singer. He issued Elvis a new pair of boots, 2 extra blankets, and a handful of emergency MRE heating elements. Elvis felt a thrill of success, quickly swapped his old perfectly fine boots for the new ones, then bundled the blankets and heaters into a discreet bag. He also managed to acquire a few extra canned goods, particularly things like chicken broth and vegetables, which would be good for a sick person. He hurried back to the Schmidt house. Greta's face lit up when she saw him return, laden with items. "Oh, Elvis, what is all this?" she whispered, her eyes wide. "For Annalise," he said, placing the items on the floor. "The blankets will keep her warm, and these," he explained, showing her the MRE heaters. "You can use them to heat water or fugencies." He pointed to the canned broth. "And this is good for strong soup." Greta was almost in tears. You are too good to us," he waved it off. Liesl, understanding the gravity of the situation, immediately went to help her mother arrange the blankets over Annalise. Annalise herself stirred, her eyes fluttering open. she saw Elvis, and a faint smile touched her lips. Over the next few days, Elvis continued to visit whenever possible, bringing extra rations that he traded or found. He would sit by Annalise's side, sometimes just quietly holding her hand, sometimes singing a soft gospel hymn that seemed to soothe her. He told her stories, gentle tales of his childhood, keeping her spirits up. Liesl would bring him drawings she'd made for Annalise, and he'd pin them above her bed. Slowly, gradually, Annalise began to recover. The blankets kept her warm, the concentrated broths gave her strength, and the constant presence of Elvis and his gentle care seemed to lift her spirits. One afternoon, about a week later, Elvis arrived to find Annalise sitting up in her armchair, a knitting project in her hands again. She looked pale, but her eyes held a spark of their usual warmth. "Elvis," she said, her voice stronger than before. "My dear boy." She reached out and took his hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "You saved me. You brought warmth back into my bones, and joy back into my heart." Elvis felt a deep blush creep up his neck. "Just glad you're feeling better, Annalise," he mumbled. Truly happy Greta watched them, tears glistening in her eyes. "He is right, Elvis. You are more than a friend. You are family." Liesl ran up and hugged his leg. "My hero, Elvis." In that moment, Elvis felt a profound joy, a sense of accomplishment far greater than any record sale or sold-out concert. He hadn't just traded food for food. He had traded his heart for theirs. And in return, they had given him a profound sense of belonging and purpose. He had been able to make a real difference, to bring comfort and hope to people he genuinely cared for. It was a big joy born from a small sorrow, and it solidified the bond between the American soldier and the German family in a way nothing else could. As winter thawed into a tentative spring, a new kind of chill began to settle over Elvis. News, whispers at first, then official announcements started circulating through the barracks. Rotations were beginning. Soldiers were being sent home. Elvis's deployment was drawing to a close. His heart swelled with the thought of returning to Graceland, to his family, to the life he'd left behind. But beneath the excitement, a deep sadness took root. He looked at the Schmidt family, Annalise, fully recovered and knitting vigorously. Greta, her quiet strength a constant presence. Liesl, now confident and playful, her bright eyes always seeking his. How could he leave them? He tried to keep the news to himself for as long as possible, wanting to savor every remaining moment. The change in his demeanor, a subtle melancholy that even his usual charm couldn't mask, didn't escape Greta's notice. One evening, as they shared a meal of homemade potato pancakes, Greta finally broached the subject. "Elvis," she said softly, her eyes searching his. "We hear the soldiers they are leaving, going back to America." Elvis put down his fork. He looked at each of their faces, seeing the unspoken question, the dawning apprehension. "Yes, Greta," he admitted, his voice a little rough. "My time here is almost done. I'm scheduled to leave in a few weeks." A heavy silence fell over the small room. Liesl's spoon clattered, her hands resting in her lap. The comforting warmth of the fire suddenly felt distant. Liesl's eyes filled with tears. "You are leaving forever." Elvis reached out and took her hand. "Not forever, Liesl," he said, trying to infuse his voice with a confidence he didn't quite feel. "I'll always remember you, and maybe I'll come back to visit one day." Greta's lips were pressed into a thin line, but her eyes held a profound sadness. "We knew this day would come," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it does not make it easier." "I don't know what I'll do without your cooking," Elvis said, trying for a light tone, but his voice wavered. "Mess hall food will taste even worse now." Annalise reached across the table and placed her hand on his arm, her touch gentle but firm. "You came into our lives, Elvis, when we needed it most. You brought us not just food, but kindness. Hope you reminded us that there is good in the world even after so much darkness." Her voice was soft but strong. "We will be sad to see you go, but we will always remember. You over the next few weeks, Every meal felt bittersweet. Greta cooked his favorites one after another, as if trying to imprint the flavors of her home onto his memory. Sauerbraten, schnitzel, all the delicious breads and cakes. Each bite was seasoned with unspoken farewells. Liesl made him a small, crude drawing, a portrait of him in his uniform standing next to her, and her mother holding hands. Anneliese, with painstaking effort, knitted him a small, soft scarf, simple but clearly made with love. Elvis, in turn, tried to prepare them. He gathered as many long-lasting rations as he could without drawing suspicion, leaving them in discreet drops for Greta to find. He spent extra time with Liesl, teaching her more English words, making her laugh. He played the old guitar for them, singing his favorite gospel songs, his voice filled with emotion. He also had a difficult conversation with Greta and Anneliese about what his life was really like back in America. He showed them a few small photographs, carefully kept in his wallet. One of Graceland, one of him performing on stage. Their eyes widened with a mix of awe and understanding. "So this is why you are so different," Greta murmured, looking at a photo of him surrounded by throngs of adoring fans. "You are a king to them." Elvis just smiled sadly. "Just Elvis to you," he said. "Always." He knew that staying in touch would be hard. Letters would take weeks if they even arrived. Phones were a luxury. The vast ocean would soon separate them. One evening, as he prepared to leave, a wave of profound sadness washed over him. He was leaving not just a country, but a family. The family that had brought him comfort and genuine human connection when he was just a soldier, far from home. "I'll miss you all," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He hugged Greta, then Anneliese, who held him tightly. He knelt to hug Liesl, who clung to him fiercely, her small face buried in his shoulder. "Don't forget us, Elvis," Liesl whispered, her voice muffled. "Never, little one," he promised, his own eyes burning. "Never." He walked away from the house, turning once to see them standing in the doorway, waving. The light from within cast their figures in a warm glow, a last, lingering image of home. The cold German air no longer felt just like cold. It felt like loss. He was going home. But he was also leaving a piece of his heart behind in a small, humble house in Friedberg, with the family who had taught him that the greatest treasures weren't found on a stage, but in the simple act of sharing, of caring, of connection. The final morning dawned with a pale, watery sun peeking through the clouds. Elvis stood in line with his company, his duffel bag packed, the new scarf Anneliese knitted, tucked securely around his neck, beneath his uniform jacket. The air on the platform was charged with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. Soldiers joked, slapped backs, and talked loudly about home, but for Elvis, there was a quiet solemnity. He had visited the Schmidt family one last time just before dawn. It had been a quick, tearful goodbye filled with promises they all knew would be hard to keep. Liesl had given him a small pressed flower from their garden, a forget-me-not, and he had pressed a framed photograph of himself, a formal army portrait, into Greta's hands. "So you remember the soldier who loved your food," he'd said, trying to make them smile. Now, as the train whistle shrieked, signaling departure, he stood tall, scanning the small crowd that had gathered at the edge of the platform. He saw them. Greta, Anneliese, and Liesl, standing a little apart, a little behind the official onlookers. Liesl waved frantically her small hand, a blur against the gray sky. Greta offered a soft, sad smile, and Anneliese simply nodded, her eyes wise and full of understanding. Elvis raised his hand, offering a final heartfelt wave. He didn't just wave at them, he saluted them, a gesture of profound respect and gratitude. They were his civilian family, his anchors in a strange land, and they had given him so much more than meals. As the train slowly pulled away, the faces blurred into the distance, but their image remained sharp in his mind. He looked out the window, watching Friedberg recede, feeling the vibrations of the train beneath him, carrying him further and further from that little house, that warm kitchen, that quiet strength. The journey back was a blur of excitement and anticipation. When he finally stepped onto American soil, the roar of the crowds, the flash of cameras, and the overwhelming embrace of fame washed over him like a tidal wave. Elvis Presley, the king, was back. The Elvis who returned was subtly, profoundly different. The months in Germany had stripped away some of the layers of celebrity, reminding him of the simple, fundamental human needs: connection, kindness, genuine interaction. The bland army rations and the rich, heartfelt meals of the Schmidt family had taught him lessons no amount of fame ever could. He carried the memory of their humility, their resilience, and their open-hearted generosity with him. He often thought of them. He missed the smell of Greta's fresh bread, the sound of Liesl's laughter, the quiet wisdom of Anneliese. Sometimes, late at night, alone in Graceland, he would close his eyes and remember the warmth of their kitchen. The simple, heartfelt conversations, the feeling of belonging that transcended language and culture. He tried to write, but letters often didn't reach them, or his busy schedule simply didn't allow for the consistent correspondence he wished for. Still, he never forgot years later. In a small, neat house in Friedberg, Germany, an older Greta, her hair streaked with silver, sits at a worn wooden table, polishing a framed photograph. It's a picture of a young American soldier, his uniform crisp, his eyes earnest. Beside her, Liesl, now a young woman, her own daughter playing at her feet, smiles at the photo. Mama, Liesl says, "Remember when he tried to help you with the leaky roof? He had no idea what he was doing." Greta chuckles, a fond memory in her eyes. He was so clumsy with tools, our Elvis, but his heart was always in the right place. She gently traces the outline of his face in the photograph. He brought us so much more than food, didn't he? He brought us hope, laughter, light. He was like a part of our family. Liesl agrees, a wistful look on her face. I wonder what he's doing now. He was famous, you said. Oh yes, Greta nods. Very famous. A legend. But to us, he was just Elvis. Our Elvis. The fire crackles in the stove, filling the room with warmth, a comfort that has endured through the years. The scent of fresh bread cooling on the counter fills the air. The lessons learned, the kindness shared, the bond forged in simplicity and necessity remain a cherished part of their lives. And across the ocean, in the grand halls of Graceland, Elvis Presley, the king, would sometimes pause, a quiet smile on his lips. He'd remember the taste of a homemade German meal, the warmth of a humble kitchen, and the faces of a family who had reminded him in a tumultuous time of the quiet power of human connection, a power far greater than any crown. He knew that his time in Friedberg trading army rations for home-cooked meals had been one of the most truly nourishing periods of his life, a heartwarming chapter forever etched into his heart.